when I was somewhere between 5 and 8, I don't remember really, my parents who were living overseas, they took me to concentration camp, and they showed me the big ovens for the big people and the little ovens for the children. And this made a very strong impression on me. And my mother said to me at the time, she says, if you don't want this ever to happen again, you have to go live in Israel and fight and possibly die for Israel.
Wow. That's a pretty straightforward message.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. During the times I was growing up, in 1961, for my bar mitzvah, we came to Israel, and I had two different types of cousins, religious cousins who lived in Har Nof and Meah Shearim, and totally non-religious cousins who lived in Ramat Gan. One cousin named Moshe Epstein was a big, tall guy, and he had knife wounds all over his body from fighting during the 48 War. He fought also for the British against the Germans, and he drove a truck. He was not a very wealthy individual. Matter of fact, he was poor.
Yeah.
But I remember when I left there after visiting for a couple of months when I was 13, he picked me up off the ground and wouldn't let me back down. And I said, come on, Moshe, let me back down. With one hand, he took the earth from the garden and he put it in my face. And he says, I'm the cousin who's not religious, but this is my religion, the land of Israel.
Wow.
And I'm not going to put you down till you promise to come and live here.
Whoa.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and drop a quick comment to help us keep the conversations going.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Kef International Aliyah Shipping Company. We focus on logistics so you can focus on the journey home.
So why did you come here today? No, I'm just kidding. So we're going to start maybe with a little bit of family history.
Okay.
Like where you came from, where your parents came from, where your grandparents came from.
Okay. My mother's parents, the father came from Jerusalem, and they moved around 1916, 1917 from Meah Shearim.
They moved to Chicago in 1970. So when did they come to Israel?
On my mother's side, my grandfather's family was in Israel from 1809. They were part of the Vilna Gaon, sent a group of people, and they were originally in Hebron till about 1850, 1860, and then they moved and they asked Montefiore for a piece of land that later became Meah Shearim. And I have documentation with my, I guess, great-great-grandfather's signature asking the Turkish government and Montefiore to intercede so they can get property to build Meah Shearim.
Montefiore was related to the government. He was a Jew.
He was a Jew, but he had contacts throughout the world, and he was very influential with the Turkish government to be able to get many vineyards up north and bought land, and he was very generous.
Where was he from?
He's from England.
He was from England. He lived here?
No. I think he was pretty old by the time he first came to Israel. Him and his wife were really one of the first Zionists, 1850s. They contributed a lot of money to the different yeshuvs at the time. Near Haifa,
Zichron
Yaakov. I think they also contributed to Petah Tikva. They had tried to start building up Israel.
And where were they? And the Turks were here for
500 years.
500 years. So figure they ended their
after World War One.
Yeah.
The Turks picked the wrong side. They picked the Austrian, Hungarian Empire as Axis, and so when they lost, then the question came up to what to do with all the countries that they had occupied, including Egypt, Israel. Israel was originally, part of Israel was called Palestine, but it was a place where the Jews lived. The Arabs really didn't start coming here until after the Jews came first in the like with my great-great-grandparents in the 1800s.
They were probably living here in very rural settings. Not at all?
Not a lot, okay?
Wow.
I've had Mark Twain writes that that he toured all of Israel and he could hardly find anybody. And the main centers such as Safat, Hebron, and Jerusalem were mostly occupied by Jews. And there were
Right.
Christian pilgrims also, but most of the Arabs didn't come to much later.
If there's nothing you need to do, you can just leave. You want to just check in with Manjit to see if everything's going okay. Both are on. Just have them check. We can edit it afterwards to get it right.
So on my mother's side, they were very religious.
Uh-huh.
My grandfather got the smicha as a rabbi from Meah Shearim at 18 years old.
Wow.
I think he married shortly afterwards. I think my grandmother must have been 15, 16 at the time. Her family were Litvaks. They came from Lithuania.
Right.
And they brought her here. Her father and mother died young, and she was brought by an aunt to Jerusalem as a shidduch with my grandfather, not my grandfather.
Uh-huh.
And his name was Ben Zion Epstein. And the Epstein family were pretty well known. They were all rabbis that were well known in Meah Shearim at the time.
Only one side was from Lithuania, from the Vilna side? That was your father's side?
Yeah, my grandfather's side had come in 1809, like I said, to Hebron.
Yeah. And that continued well into the it's still there now.
They still have relatives in Meah Shearim, and at one time it seems that my grandfather owned a lot of property. In Meah Shearim, they have these courtyards and houses and apartments built around the courtyard. One time I went with a cousin who lives in Har Nof, who was also because to Meah Shearim, and they started to try to find where my grandfather lived, and they almost killed us.
Why? Because you didn't look like them?
No, not because of that. We were asking, have you heard of Ben Zion, this and that, and they were afraid that we were going to declare the property as inheritance.
Which you may...
No, I wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. You probably could if you wanted to.
Who knows? I don't
Yeah, it's like hundreds of years later. Wow. And in Hebron...
Yes.
There were, until I listened to part of a book about the Arab murders.
That was in 1929, I believe. They
Right.
had the pogrom, Hebron.
Right.
There was a Rabbi Epstein that was the head of a yeshiva. I don't know if he was related or not.
There was a rabbi, it's still a well-known name. And your mother's side also?
That's my mother's side.
That's your mother's side. And your father's side?
My father's side is really a mirror reflection of that in the other sense.
Yeah.
They came in the 1800s to the United States from Prussia. They were Reform Jews. And apparently they were fairly wealthy. Well, on my mother's side, they were extremely poor. They have graves in Brooklyn, Queens, that I guess the border between Brooklyn and Queens is a big graveyard. And they have about 20 to 25 lessers there, dating all the way back to the early 1800s. I know one of them died in a Brooklyn theater fire.
Oh, wow.
And my grandfather and my father were military physicians. They were very patriotic to the United States.
Wow. Did they do study as soldiers, or they went to medical school and then became soldiers? And
Yeah.
Right.
And they tell the story of my grandfather on my father's side of having been torpedoed twice in World War I. He used to tell my father how they were in the water and there were sharks and everything. Of course, this gave my father fear of water. Even when I was sailing a lot, he wouldn't go on the boat or go sailing with me.
Just from the stories, not from actually having...
I think when he was engaged to my mother once, they were in Asbury Park and a big wave hit him in the water. And he accused my mother of trying to assassinate.
Wow. So they met in America.
They met in America, in Chicago.
Yeah. How did France come into the picture?
Was after World War II, pretty much close, not too long after World War II. He was still in the reserve as an officer. And then trying to think, the Korean War came into being around 1950, 51, and they took all the soldiers from Germany. Germany was occupied, and part of France was occupied for almost 10 years by the Americans, the French, English, and the Russians, obviously, on the other side. And they took those soldiers and brought them to Korea, and they asked my father to come to Alsace-Lorraine area, which is in Germany, France area.
Yeah.
And so we moved there.
So that was in the 60s?
No, it was before that.
Before the 60s?
Yeah.
Oh, during the Korean
War,
stuff?
yeah.
Oh, wow. That's right, Korean War. So you grew up there? You grew up in...
I partially grew up. When you're in the military, you're always moving around. I was in a base in Texas for a while, and we were in Metz, Thionville, a place called Baumholder in Germany. Different places. My father, they moved them around a lot.
Yeah. So you went to medical school
France.
in France. And like in Paris?
Strasbourg.
In Strasbourg. And there's a strong Jewish community in Strasbourg.
Very strong.
I think quite old as well.
No, it's a very old Jewish community. Of course, during World War II, a lot of them escaped, thank God, to Switzerland and I guess southern France also, so that they would, because the Germans had occupied the whole Alsace-Lorraine area.
When did your folks move back from Europe?
About 1961, I believe. De Gaulle kicked us they kicked the American military out of France.
Uh-huh.
And so they moved back, and I was probably about 12, 13 years old.
But you decided to go back there for...
I never really adjusted well to the United States, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
What sense? Just friends and family? You didn't have other family?
I had friends. Yeah. I don't know why. I always felt alienated in the United States, much less alienated in France, ironically. I think a lot of it had to do with the materialism of America, and I have that as a part of me. And it's like the aura you have inside of you. And I knew when I went back to America finally, if I don't know, 1978, 79,
yeah,
I knew it was not the right move in a sense. And sure enough, it got me into a lot of trouble because as a doctor, you end up making a lot of money,
right,
and you buy big houses. Of course, everything is owned by the bank, but you have a Porsche car, sailboat, house, a 6,000 square foot house with an acre of land, and you just get wrapped up into the consumerism of America.
Yeah.
And it almost took me down.
In what sense? Emotionally, spiritually, and physically, every way?
Every which way, including a very bad divorce.
And was Israel in the picture well before that? Or?
Israel was always in the picture. When I was somewhere between 5 and 8, I don't remember really, my parents, who were living overseas, they took me to concentration camp, and they showed me the big ovens for the big people and the little ovens for the children. And this made a very strong impression on me. And my mother said to me at the time, she says, if you don't want this ever to happen again, you have to go live in Israel and fight and possibly die for Israel.
Wow. That's a pretty straightforward message.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. During the times I was growing up, my mother, she wasn't even modern Orthodox, even though she came from an extreme Orthodox family. She had Friday night dinners, and she always talked about Israel and the Zionist movement. She had been part of the Zionist movement when she was younger. I had been in Beitar when I was a teenager in New York. It looks like we're going to need another Beitar in New York. It's an youth organization that would go hunting for Nazis. And it's funny because at that time we had blue uniforms and they had a patch of Israel with both the West Bank and the state of Israel. Now, this is before 67. And people would say to me, "What are you, crazy, Israel?
You're going to
Ne-
get
never
back to
go to
Judea and
Judea,
Samaria.
And it shows you what happened.
Everybody has a little bit of prophecy, and
Yes.
especially people.
Well, I forgot what was it. Rabbi Kahan was the leader
Kahan.
of Beitar at the
Yeah.
time. I was always a Zionist. I wasn't religious at all, but we were always Zionists. My mother was very Zionistic. We had, of course, many relatives here in Israel. In 1961, for my bar mitzvah, we came to Israel, and I had two different types of cousins, religious cousins who lived in Har Nof and Meah Shearim, and totally non-religious cousins who lived in Ramat Gan. One cousin named Moshe Epstein was a big, tall guy, and he had knife wounds all over his body from fighting during the 48 War. He fought also for the British against the Germans, and he drove a truck. He was not a very wealthy individual. Matter of fact, he was poor.
Yeah.
But I remember when I left there after visiting for a couple of months when I was 13, he picked me up off the ground and wouldn't let me back down. And I said, "Come on, Moshe, let me back down." With one hand, he took the earth from the garden and he put it in my face, and he says, "I'm the cousin who's not religious, but this is my religion, the land of Israel.
Wow.
And I'm not going to put you down till you promise to come and live here."
Whoa.
Now, that was many years ago. That was 1961.
Wow.
And I always remember that. In 1963, I was a bad boy in the years,
Yeah.
and they put me in Kfar HaYarok with other misbehaved young kids. And that was near Tel Aviv, and I learned how to drive a tractor and put water pipes down for the trees and things like that.
So you stayed for a while.
I stayed for, there was interim time periods where I was coming back and forth.
Which is in the 60s, early 60s, that wasn't a given. It wasn't like
No, Israel
yeah.
was entirely different, first of all.
Yeah.
I remember at my cousin's apartment, there were no phones or anything. People had to go to the McCullough to talk to someone, especially overseas. The son of the owner of the McCullough would come running upstairs to the apartment and say, "You have a phone call." And then you'd have to run downstairs to the McCullough to answer the phone. But people I would walk around with my gun, and people would say, "Who are you?" Everybody
Right.
knew each other.
Right.
And they would sometimes instantly dance in the streets. It was only 10 years or so after the establishment of the State of Israel. Everyone was inviting you in their house. This is what made me eventually move here. And everybody was wonderful and beautiful until 1973. And then after the 73 war, things became very difficult.
And became difficult because of the war,
Yeah.
the Yom Kippur War. Because it was...
It was, in a way, very similar to October 7th and the fact that people were betrayed by their leaders, the military leaders, and it's really God's hand that managed to guide them through survival.
Wow. And they resigned. The leaders resigned after that.
Them are still listed as heroes.
Oh, really?
Moshe Dayan.
Oh, Moshe Dayan was a character. Yeah, he was
no, many of them are still they didn't all resign. There were inquiries, but they never went anywhere. There's a lot of politics involved, unfortunately, in the Israeli government.
Yeah, that's the nature of government. When did you actually decide to pick up?
That's a funny story. I moved to Florida in around 1981, I think. I set up a private practice. I also was a head of a department of obstetrics and gynecology in a big hospital. I was really in the American mode of living. I always had this dream of living in Israel, and always remembering Moshe Epstein and him picking me up and not letting me down until I made that promise. One day I was playing golf with a totally non-religious fellow. I was talking, I think now I'm divorced and my kids are growing up. I think I'm going to make the move to Israel. And he said, oh, you've been saying that for years.
Who said it?
He said it.
He said it to
we
you.
were playing golf. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was mocking me. And he says, you're just shooting off your mouth, basically. So that made me say, all right, that's it. I'm moving. And then I called up the Jewish agency, and they told me a whole bunch of lies about it, how easy it is to make Aliyah, and that someone with my degrees and my medical experience, there should be no problem, which was a joke. So then I started the process of trying to move to Israel. By that time, I had many Israeli patients who were completely flipped out, told me, you can't do this, they'll eat you alive. My brother, who was very religious, told me I shouldn't move to Israel.
And where was he?
He was in the West Hampstead, Long Island, in a very religious community. My whole life, the more people told me not to do something, the more determined I was. So I did make the move in 2005, Hanukkah. Yeah, that's what people were telling me, all this and everything.
That's all along there.
I had lived in France. I had lived in other countries as a physician, and I moved throughout the United States. I didn't think it was going to be that difficult to move to Israel, especially I had been here maybe, I don't know, 10 times or something.
Yeah.
And I had family here and everything. I remember about 3 months after I made Aliyah, I was walking down Yafo Street. And at the time, they had cars there and everything. I was so upset. And I was usually not a person to get emotionally disturbed about my situation. I'd been in very difficult situations before. I was really in tears. And I said, what did I do? They were all right. I destroyed my life. Because they said, oh, we're getting a driver's license. No problem. You just show them your American license and you'll get a driving license. So about 4 different offices later, having to take driver's ed.
And this is 2005. This is not, we're not talking the 1800s.
No.
Yeah.
They going to a Russian doctor who you give him 75 shekels and he says, all right, you're fit to drive. He doesn't listen to your heart. He doesn't test your eyes. He's just sitting down below where they give you the forms for the license on Yaffa Street. It was insane, all right? Completely. I hope it's better now. I think it's better.
No.
I went through, they helped a little bit, but I think they help a lot better now. Everything was extremely complicated and difficult. I had enough financial money at the time, but they wouldn't give me an apartment. I had to have someone I knew in Israel sign the lease because they didn't trust me. I had apartments in Europe. I had apartments in New York. I never experienced that. And how old was I? I was in my 50s. And it's like having your parents have to sign that they'll pay if you skip out, guarantor. Yeah.
Right.
It was extremely mentally difficult, but thank God that I got through it. The first couple of years, I think, of anybody making Aliyah is not easy. And,
just the culture shock.
Yeah, it's all the bureaucracy and the culture shock. It's not that much because here in Israel, most Americans, at least first generation, they're within their own American communities. They don't really go into the Israeli neighborhoods and the Israeli communities.
Right.
And so they're with people that have the same experience that you have.
I think it's gotten easier.
Gotten easier.
Yeah. I think they've to just make Aliyah. They require FBI passes.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Because like we before they required FBI things, we had customers in the shipping business who, whenever somebody gave me a really hard time, I would look them up and see they had a rich history. Some of them were colorful characters.
I know that when I moved my stuff here, they give you a big,
they did.
What's it called?
A crate or container.
Container, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
They wanted me to leave them my passport. I had traveled around the world and worked in many different places. I refused to give my passport. It was amazing. I couldn't get my stuff. It seems every time I went to do something, it was like that. I don't know if they still be asking for your passport, but we were trained, especially as an army soldier, right? Never give up your passport.
And now I think it's a lot easier. As I said, it's a little bit like the American system of getting into medical school or Israel. Like it's hard to get in, but once you're in,
Yeah, that's American. It's not
that's
the
American.
French system.
The system is the opposite.
Easy to get in. 2,000 students were in my first year. 350 were in my second year. And the third year, only 300. Then you're more or less ensured of finishing.
I wonder if it's still, I guess it's probably still that way.
It's still that way, yeah.
Yeah, it's still that way. So interesting. But you also acquired somewhere along the way, you from coming from grandparents, at least on one side, who were very religious, or maybe on both sides, but only on
my grandparents on my father's side reformed that celebrated Christmas. They had a Christmas tree. They had Christmas stockings. I remember this.
So the Epsteins are on...
The Epsteins on my mother's side.
Got it. Okay. And on your father's side, yeah, that was...
Very reformed.
Very reformed. They have reform in Israel now also. It's not common.
They have a big center near the old city.
Right. But at some point you acquired a taste for the religion and for a mystical side of the religion. Right. How did that...
I started reading books. Sometime when I was already an obstetric gynecologist in Florida, I started, I think it's about that time I moved to Florida, I started reading Aria Kaplan's books. I became very interested in Kabbalistic thinking. At one time, we had an Israeli nanny for my daughter, who is now 40 years old. She said to me, "You're Jewish, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm Jewish." She says, "Your grandparents are Jewish?" I said, "Yeah, my grandparents are." She says, "You have to come with me. We need a minyan for your site." And she drags me to this storefront place, and it was a Chabad rabbi, Shalom Adler, came, and he looked like my relatives in Meah Shearim.
Yeah. This was where?
In Florida, Clearwater, Florida. And I was really not very happy about the situation at all. And he was a very strong character. He said to me, very slowly he talked to me about Chabad and what was Chabad doing, and he wanted me to come more often when there was yurt sites, and he eased me very into it. But prior to that, I was eating ham sandwiches on Yom Kippur. Eventually, I don't know, over a time period, I koshered my home. And then very gradually, I started not eating meat on the outside. I would eat chicken that wasn't kosher. Where I lived in Clearwater, Florida, there was no kosher restaurants or anything like that. Over time, I said, all right, I'll be Shomer Mitzvah Shabbos, 2 Shabbases out of the month. Meanwhile, my brother was very religious, and he was telling me how wonderful.
Did he?
He went through, first he was Zen Buddhist, and he was contemplating his navel for about a year and eating macrodiotics. And then somebody in his university came from a very well-known Moroccan religious family, Abasera.
Oh, yeah.
And he got a hold of my brother and he made him more religious. My brother's right on the edge of what you would call Haredi.
Where was this university in America?
In New York, Harper University. My brother dropped out of his university, and my father and mother went out of their minds. He wanted to go to yeshiva, but he had no money. So my parents said that if he goes to college at night, they'll pay for him to go to yeshiva. My brother went to yeshiva, and he went to college at night. Eventually, he got a diploma and got into medical school in America. He's a doctor also.
And he's here?
No, he's in New York.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Story also.
There are lots of stories.
So I wanted to, the other day we were talking about we saw a Brazilian lady.
Oh, okay.
And you said, you knew her, and your wife is also Brazilian. And we have some Brazilians in our community also. And apparently there's a whole history that goes back hundreds of years.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about that?
Okay, not very much. I can tell you my wife's father came from Lebanon as a young man. I think they had about 11 or 12 brothers and sisters. He went to Brazil from Lebanon. They had tremendous training. I don't know if you say if
You
it's
mean training
religious.
religious training?
And traditional
Right.
religious training. One time I was in Tiberias with him, and we were in a Sephardic synagogue in Tiberias. I said, "Do you want me to get you a prayer book?" He looked at me. I don't need a prayer book.
Fair enough.
He knew all the prayers by heart and everything. And he's not the only one that I've seen from this. Her mother came from Poland, thank God, before the war. My wife's mother's family had been destroyed during the war. My mother's mother was an appellate court judge in Brazil, and she was very high up. She still lives there, has an apartment in Rio de Janeiro. Unfortunately, my stepfather passed away a couple of years ago. But they have a very strong Jewish community all throughout Brazil. My experience is very many South American countries, they have very strong Jewish communities. And most of them are Sephardic communities, and they're very tied to Israel and Judaism, but without being ostentatious. They assimilate professionally into the country, but as far as marital relations, friends and family, they stay very closely knit together.
But Sephardi suggests that they came back.
Some of them came from hundreds of years. They were Marranos, or they came at the time of the expulsion, 1492. And some of them came, many countries like Brazil and Argentina and Panama, they were the only ones accepting Jews to immigrate in the 1900s. And my grandfather, who had never been in Brazil, had a Brazilian passport. Right after World War I, Palestine, not the Palestine that you see them from going crazy in the streets about, but Palestine, which was under British mandate, was considered as still an enemy state because it was part of Turkey before. They had an open immigration policy until 1926, I believe, in the United States.
From Turkey?
This area from Turkey to go into the United States. But Brazil and Canada and some other countries allowed it. Somewhere or another, his brother or his father had been a shliach for Chabad in Brazil in the late 1800s.
Your father's brother?
My grandfather, Epstein.
Uh-huh.
And
So
he managed to wiggle a passport from Brazil. And using that Brazilian passport, he got into Chicago. There was a lot of famine and problems in Jerusalem, and so they left for the United States, where my mother had an aunt already living there, who unfortunately had 2 children die in their early 20s, Spanish flu, and they both passed away, and I guess that also stimulated my grandmother and my grandfather to move. And my grandfather was a pretty well-known rabbi, but unfortunately, after they moved and the economy started getting bad during the Depression, nobody wanted rabbis.
Yeah, because you have to support.
So he had to travel to different areas of the country to try to get work. And they lived in poverty in Chicago.
Wow. You still have relatives in Chicago? Here, in Israel?
Yeah. I don't think anybody's left in Chicago. They're in the graves. I have graves there.
Graves, yeah.
I don't think anybody's left in Chicago. I have my brother who's in Long Island, New York. And I have other relatives. I have a cousin whose parents died when she was young, who lived in my house for many years. She considers me like a brother. She's the great-granddaughter of the Chavetz Chaim. She lives in Riverdale, New York. I have relatives from my father's side, but we're not too much in communication with them.
Because some of them still in America, moved to Israel.
But almost all of my grandfather's grandchildren have come back to Israel. My brother and my cousin and that haven't, but most of them came back to Israel.
When did they come back?
Over the years. One was one of the founding members of Kibbutz. Wait a minute. what's the name of the kibbutz? It's a religious kibbutz near Ashdod. I always see
don't
their
know.
fruit cans with olives and things like that. They were one of the founding members, and my cousin Norley still lives there. I have cousins all over. My stepchildren used to laugh. I was in a mall once in Herzliya, and I kept on bumping into cousins. And they laughed. They said, you have so many cousins here. And then I have a strong family connection with Rabbi Yosef Epstein Hanoff. Also stayed at our house for a while. His father is buried in Beit Shemesh. He was a rabbi and a cantor. And he's buried it's Yaakov Epstein. He's buried in the cemetery in Beit Shemesh. Some of the cousins that were living in Tel Aviv or in Herzliya, they moved to some part of Philadelphia. I forget, Cherry Hill or something like that.
Yeah,
Philadelphia, a lot of Israelis there.
that's right.
That's about it.
But overall, you made it through the tough times. The first 20
Hopefully.
years, I usually say the first 30 years are the hardest. And in order to get the Hebrew down, I think about 30 years.
Yeah, I still don't have the Hebrew down. That's all I know.
You've been working as a physician here for how long?
For 20 years.
And I recall that when you first came, even though you'd been the head of the department at a big Mount Sinai or one of the big hospitals in Florida, that they demoted you to a private.
Totally.
Yeah.
I was in my area in Clearwater, Florida. I was the guy that if somebody had problems in surgery and couldn't handle it, even in another hospital, they would call up and ask me to come to help them, and they would give me temporary privileges so I could be in the hospital. I came here, and they wouldn't allow me to do a dilatation and curettage, which is something I did when I was in medical school.
So, have things changed over the 20 years, or you're still humble pie?
I eventually proved myself, and then, of course, when I got to be 70 years old, somebody wished me happy birthday, and I said, thank you. And then the head of the department says, oh, how old are you? So I said, I just turned 70. He says, no, wait a minute. I see you in the operating room yesterday. So I said, yeah. He said, you're not supposed to operate after 67. So I said, nobody told me. So that ended my surgical days.
Oh, no. They have strict requirements as to
I
how...
guess if you're not a professor, you don't have protexia or whatever. I was very upset at first.
Yeah.
Because it took a long time to prove myself. And then I had been doing surgery for 45 years. It was part of my life. I go to sleep at night either thinking about the surgery I had done or the surgery that I was about to do the next morning. All of a sudden, that was taken away from me. But in the end, it was very good. I had a lot less to worry about today.
And you get to have, surgeons tend not to be conversant with their...
I was always conversant with my
yeah.
patient.
But
Can't
now-
you tell? I think that's a big mistake that they don't talk to their patients.
But it's changing. Yeah.
Hopefully, the medical doctors, the internal medicine and
Yeah.
general practitioners,
Yeah.
they try every possible medicine in the world before they'll send you to the surgeon. And the surgeons, said, when in doubt, take it out. Well, that's what I like about obstetric gynecology is that you had most of the time to make decisions between deciding to treat someone medically or surgically. Plus, at the time, you had many emergency surgical operations to save lives, such as ectopic pregnancies and things like that.
I don't know if you do birth stuff,
Not anymore. I did for many years.
but in America, it's many more cesareans than
Yes.
anywhere else in the world.
When I worked in France, my cesarean section rate was between 7 and 8%. In America, it was between 12 and 15%. And that's considered pretty good. A lot of places, it's in the 35%.
And then they discovered that in America, every third person has a peanut allergy or a nut allergy. And they started saying that going through the birth canal was like immunization against different things. So you don't get that with, as you say, they say the mutual struggling of the baby and the mother creates some sort of a...
When I was working in France many years ago, they were very into these water births. I never jumped into the tub to deliver a baby, but I bent down and got the baby afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't,
didn't
I
seem
don't
like it
think
was-
this affects mentally the kids that much.
And maybe the mothers. They also have, I guess in Europe, they have a lot more home births.
Yeah, they have
Then-
home births here also.
Yeah. But not as much as in Holland or someplace.
No, Holland has a lot of home births, and
Yeah.
Holland has probably a very low C-section. And so France has a lot of midwives too.
Yeah.
And I had a midwife practice in Florida. Trained midwives are very good. The main thing is you have to know when something is not right and
Right.
know how to handle it and when
Right.
to call someone else.
But they could probably, because they're so experienced, handle a lot more serious situations.
It's not a question of aliens. You have to know when you have a serious situation and when you don't. Midwives are much better, probably, especially before the age of ultrasound, of determining the baby's weight just by their hands on the mother's stomach.
Uh-huh.
If they know they're going to have a big baby and it's the first baby,
Well,
they
yes.
should have a doctor ready in case the shoulder gets stuck or something.
Yeah. So they don't do stuff like that. Reverse it if the baby's upside down or something.
No.
They don't do stuff
No,
like that.
no,
Or
no.
if the umbilical cord is around the neck.
The cord around the neck happens pretty often.
Yeah. Overall, the Aliyah story has been a success. You feel satisfied and...
Well, after the next commercial break, I'll tell you.
Okay, we're not going to say anything.
No, don't say anything
No,
negative.
but you have...
I'm happy.
Yeah.
I'm happy. Ultimately, hopefully I'm still on the journey, but where I am spiritually, mentally, and physically is much more improved than where I was in Florida, even though in Florida I had much more material wealth.
But you pray in a shul with French
Yes.
people, mostly?
They're Sephardic.
Sephardic,
Yeah.
right. So you're comfortable in a lot of different places. So after medical school, you stayed in France for a while?
Yeah.
Okay.
My father, I remember him getting very upset. He came to France and he said, okay, enough of this business with the French women. My father was a very patriotic American. He says, it's time to come back to America.
Yeah.
He says, you've had your fun. You've had a lot of women. Now you come back and you get serious. I think he threatened to disown me if I didn't come back.
Whoa.
So even though I was 30 years old at the time, I was not a kid. I went back.
So I recall you had a couple of girlfriends. Anyways, but yeah, America was... and how was it coming back to America?
It was all very
yeah.
difficult. First of all, my father was sure that with my degree of training, I would be easily accepted into any hospital. Many years later, like 25 years later, the Jewish agency guy said,
And that's right.
And I'd go to one interview after another, and they would say, you're a foreign medical graduate. So I said, what does that mean? When I traveled around Europe and I told them that I was a graduate and had done my internat exam in France,
Yeah.
it's at the University of Louis Pasteur, Strasbourg. It was like saying you were from Oxford. I come to America. They
Who's
treat
Louis
like
Pasteur?
it's like I came from Pakistan, some university in Pakistan. It was crazy. I went to an interview in Florida with a guy, and I was so happy because he came from Belgium and he spoke French. So I did the interview in French with him. He said, listen, you're a nice guy. I got to tell you, you're never going to get in here. So I said, why? He said, because you're a foreign medical graduate. I said, but you're a foreign medical graduate. He was the head of the department in University of Miami Medical School. I said, you're a foreign medical graduate. He says, yeah, but that was a different time period. So it was very difficult. And then my brother found a position for me. I had to go back to the second year of residency. I had already done more in France because something happened to somebody in Chicago, and they needed a doctor desperately that could deliver babies and had some experience. So my brother got me into Mercy Hospital, which was a Catholic hospital in Chicago, where I was greeted as the effing Jew.
Oh,
Yeah, I'd walk into labor and delivery and they'd say, here comes the Jew. Times were very different. Oh,
this was in the Late 70s.
early.
In the late 70s, in Mercy Hospital.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
And they weren't joking.
No, they weren't joking. It was incredible. You can't imagine. They brought me up on trial once, tried to get me thrown out. As I said before, the more people were ever against me, the more I was stubborn to do it. I stayed there. I didn't quit, and I'm happy I did. I have to say that the head nun of the hospital, see, I had worked in a Catholic hospital in France, and they were very nice, very respectful and everything. Then I come to the Chicago hospital, and I couldn't believe they were so racist and prejudiced against me. But the head nun, one day, she knew I was having problems, and she said to me, we're in the elevator, and she said to me, Dr. Lesser, you look very angry and upset all the time. I said, I'm not being treated well. She says, just say hello, good morning to everyone. Ask them how their day, no matter how they look at you, no matter what they say to you, you just say, good morning, how are you, have a nice day, and you'll see things will turn around. And it was amazing.
I probably shouldn't be giving moral lessons to my customers, but sometimes we have customers who everybody is terrified of speaking to because they are difficult. I pretended that they'd already made the transformation. I say, if you speak really pleasantly to everybody and upbeat and cheerful, giving the benefit of the doubt, people will really want to speak to you and not hide from you. I don't know if they've changed or not, but...
One of the fellows who was a very big shot in the hospital, the obstetrician gynecologist, brought me up on charges because I had delivered vaginally twins that were having a problem, and the mother was... the placenta was separating at about 30 weeks, and she was going to die, and I delivered them quickly. And everybody survived, but he said I shouldn't have done that. And it was nasty to me all the time. He eventually, in my last year of residency, wanted me to be his partner.
Yeah.
And he was a big anti-Semite, a super anti-Semite.
There's no accounting for transformation. Do you have time to talk about the current situation in Israel and your take on it? Do you listen to the news?
I do. My current take is that historically you see these things happening. What upsets me probably the most is worldwide anti-Semitism. And anytime you try to correct people historically, they say you're telling them a false narrative, way out of everything. In France, when you would argue with someone and they couldn't win the argument, they would say, what do you know? You eat hamburgers.
Oh, as opposed to steak.
Yeah, steak, you're an American,
viande hachée, like ground meat, yeah.
I think the most important thing that was happened over the last 5 years with the COVID crisis and what's happening in America now and happening certainly in France and throughout the world, and the very reminiscent of pre-World War II. The best thing that can happen and best way to protect ourselves is to have unity. You understand? Among the Jewish people. And unity means that you're going to have two people who don't agree on things, but you have to respect the other person as a human being, no matter how much you think he's or she is wrong. And this is extremely important in Israel. And whether I can't tell you whether I agree that yeshiva students should be in the army or not, but what I can tell you is that you shouldn't go out and throw rocks and spit on and denigrate any fellow human being. And we need this unity. If we don't have this unity, then we're in for real rough times.
But that we're talking about unity among the Jews.
Unity among the Jews, and they afterwards worry about the rest of the world.
That's part of the narrative. One of the prophets talks about eventually Israel being completely isolated.
Yeah.
And I'm not clear whether it's considered to be a positive or a negative thing.
No, if you prepare for it, it'll be a positive thing. You understand? Certainly in my mind, we can't depend on the Europeans or America for weapons.
Yes.
Things wouldn't have gone as well as they went if Trump hadn't been elected, because he gave us everything we wanted. And we would still be under the threat or have had an atomic bomb explode here in Israel by the Iranians. Of course, God is always helping us, but I don't think we can depend, unless we have some degree of righteousness within ourselves, I don't think we can always depend on miracles.
That's a good place to wind up, not to depend on miracles. Thanks so much, Steve.
You're welcome.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and drop a quick comment to help us keep the conversations going.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Kef International Aliyah Shipping Company. We focus on logistics so you can focus on the journey home.